I used to believe in the process. Do the work, be reliable, don't complain. Someone notices. The raise shows up, the title catches up. That belief kept me steady at Halden Systems for a little over 3 years. We were growing fast, bragging in town halls about discipline and efficiency, while finance quietly held the place together. I wasn't a star on stage. I was a senior analyst in finance, operating expenses, payroll-heavy teams. My job was simple on paper and brutal in reality. Reconcile payroll to budget, cost center by cost center, explain every variance, and make sure leadership's pretty numbers match the ledger. It made me useful. When executives wanted answers, they didn't call HR. They called whoever could pull a report, speak in facts, and not flinch. Over time, my scope expanded the way it always does in companies like that. One, "Can you take this on?" turned into me owning the payroll forecast process for multiple departments. I built templates. I caught errors before they hit the general ledger. I covered gaps when payroll was short-staffed. I became the person people pinged when something looked wrong. My manager, Priya, noticed. During my mid-year review, she said, "I'm putting you in for an off-cycle adjustment." Off-cycle mattered. The annual merit cycle was a ritual designed to disappoint you politely. Off-cycle was supposed to be different. Retention, market corrections, the company admitting you were doing work they couldn't replace quickly. Priya didn't promise miracles. She just said, "You're under-leveled for what you're doing. I'll push it." So I did what you're trained to do. I documented impact. 1 page, no drama. Process improvements, risks avoided, work absorbed. I sent it to Priya and I waited. Weeks passed, then a full month. When I asked for an update, Priya exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all day. "HR is pushing back," she said. "They're saying compensation bans." Comp bans. The phrase that sounds objective until you're the one being boxed in by it. We had just closed a quarter above plan. Leadership celebrated. HR sent out a cheerful email about compensation calibration and consistency. Then at the bottom, the line that actually mattered. Direct compensation questions to your HR business partner. Mine was Elaine. Elaine scheduled me for a meeting called Career Pathing Conversation. That title alone told me how it was going to go. The room was glass. Her laptop was open. Her smile was professional, not warm. "I reviewed your compensation file," she said, and then, without a pause that suggested anything could change, "We're not able to support an off-cycle adjustment." I kept my voice calm. "Can you help me understand why? My responsibilities have expanded." Elaine nodded like she'd rehearsed this with someone. "Your role sits within a defined compensation band. An adjustment outside of cycle would create misalignment. Misalignment, a clean word for no. If the issue is leveling," I said, "then can we discuss re-leveling? I'm leading payroll forecasting across multiple cost centers. Title and level changes are evaluated during cycle," she replied. "Right now, we're focused on consistency. We want to avoid exceptions." Avoid exceptions. Unless you are the exception. I could feel my pulse in my ears, but I stayed still. "So the answer is no." "The answer is not, at this time," she corrected gently. "I can outline a development plan so you're positioned for next cycle. A plan. A future promise. A way to end the conversation without changing anything today." I left the room and sat at my desk like nothing had happened. Emails came in, people asked questions. The office sounded normal, but something in me shifted because I wasn't confused. I wasn't even surprised. I was embarrassed at how long I'd let them stretch my role while calling it opportunity. That night, I didn't rant. I didn't write some dramatic resignation post. I did what finance people do when the words don't match reality. I pulled the numbers. Every week after payroll processed, we ran a variance pack for leadership. Usually it was boring. A new hire here, a promotion there, a small adjustment with a reasonable reason code. But that Monday morning, Priya forwarded me a note from our FP&A manager. Need the payroll variance detail early. CFO wants it for Monday. I replied, understood, and opened my template. Employee ID, job code, cost center, base pay, effective date, reason code. I started scanning, tagging the usual movement, half on autopilot. Then I saw a last name I recognized. Not from finance, not from my inbox, but from the company's unspoken hierarchy. Halden, same as the CEO. My cursor stopped. My stomach tightened. The job code on the row was ordinary. The cost center wasn't executive. Nothing about it screamed special, except the base pay change. The increase was the kind of money my raise request had been denied for, except multiplied until it felt obscene. I blinked, scrolled up, scrolled back down like the numbers might rearrange themselves out of embarrassment. They didn't. Martin Halden liked to talk about merit. In town halls, he'd say, "We pay for performance," with the confidence of someone who'd never had to justify a line item. And like every founder-led company, there were rumors, quiet ones, never written down. The biggest rumor had a name, his daughter. I'd seen her twice. Once walking the office with directors, orbiting her like she already had authority. Once in a meeting where she asked a basic question and no one corrected her. Later, someone told me she was fast-tracked. Elaine's denial should have ended it. In most companies, it would. You take the hint and you move on. But finance gives you a bad habit. When someone says it's structure, you want to see the structure. So when I hit the Halden row, I filtered the register by reason code. Promotion adjustment. Effective immediately. Then I pulled last week's register and matched the employee ID. Same person. Same job family. Different base pay. The delta wasn't subtle. It wasn't market money. It was $85,000. My brain tried to negotiate with what I was seeing. Maybe annualized, maybe coded wrong, maybe a one-time payment. But payroll registers don't do poetry. They show what is going to hit the bank. I opened the job code band table we used for budgeting. Her new base pay sat above the top end like the range didn't apply. I looked around the office. Nobody was watching. Nobody knew my screen had just become a problem. 2 days earlier, HR told me exceptions were dangerous. Now the exception was approved, processed, and waiting to be paid. By the time I finished staring at that payroll line, my coffee was cold, and my hands felt too steady, like my body had decided panic would be a waste of calories. I didn't click anything I shouldn't. I didn't go digging in executive folders. I stayed in the same place I was already authorized to be. The payroll variance detail we used every single week to explain why numbers moved. Still, I knew what that round meant. A base pay increase that big doesn't happen. It gets requested, justified, approved, coded, and pushed through payroll with a paper trail. Digital, but real. Somebody had signed their name to it. And 2 days earlier, HR had looked me in the eye and told me exceptions were dangerous. I did the only thing I could do without becoming the story. I verified. First, I checked whether it was a one-time payment misfiled as base pay. It wasn't. The effective date was clean. The reason code was a promotion adjustment. The new salary flowed into the annualized forecast like a river. Then I pulled the band table we used for budgeting. Job family, level, range minimum, midpoint, maximum. Her new base pay sat above maximum like the ceiling didn't exist. I filtered for similar job codes. People at that level had modest increases. Market bumps, merit, normal. This was not normal. I saved nothing yet. No screenshots, no dramatic folder called evidence. I just copied the row into my working reconciliation sheet the way I always did. Because reconciliation sheets are expected. They're reviewed. They're boring. They're allowed. Then I did something that felt almost childish, but I needed it. I opened my own compensation history. My last raise had been small, the kind you accept because you assume the bigger one is coming later. The one Priya tried to get me, my off-cycle, was now officially denied. I remembered Elaine's face, her calm voice, the phrase, consistency. And I looked back at the payroll delta again. The irritation wasn't heat. It was pressure, like a door closing slowly. No, I went to Priya. Her calendar was stacked, but she always made space when I said, I need 5 minutes. That was the deal. I didn't waste her time. She didn't let me get blindsided. When I stepped into her office, she was mid-email, jaw tight. What's up? She asked. I kept my voice low. My off-cycle got denied. Fine. But I'm seeing a promotion adjustment on the payroll register that blows through comp bands. Priya didn't react at first, and that told me everything. She wasn't clueless. She was tired. Who? She asked, like she already knew the answer but needed me to say it. The CEO's daughter, I said. Priya blinked once, slow. Then she stood up and closed her door. That's bold, she muttered. Is it wrong? I asked. Priya looked at my screen when I angled it toward her, and her face did that thing managers do when they're calculating risk in real time. This isn't a mistake, she said finally. If payroll processed it, it's approved. So HR can approve exceptions, I said, just not mine. Priya exhaled through her nose. Don't say it like that. How should I say it? My voice stayed flat, but I could feel my patience thinning. Because Elaine told me exceptions create misalignment. Meanwhile, this is whatever you call the opposite of alignment. Priya rubbed her temple. Listen, I'm on your side. But this is the kind of thing that gets people labeled. Labeled what? I asked. She hesitated. Disruptive. Not a team player. You know the words. I did. I'd seen them used like stamps. Clean, permanent, impossible to appeal. I nodded slowly. I'm not escalating a rumor. I'm flagging a variance. Priya stared at me for a beat, then softened. If you want to validate the coding, do it the right way. Ask payroll. Keep it procedural. Procedural, safe, corporate camouflage. So I did. I opened a standard ticket to payroll operations. Please confirm promotion adjustment, reason code, and band override. For employee in cost center, I didn't add commentary. I didn't add emotion. I attached the exact excerpt of the register we always used for variance explanations. Payroll replied faster than usual, because of course they did. The response came from Marisol, the payroll lead, who'd been here longer than most directors. Confirmed. Adjustment is accurate as submitted. Approved via compensation exception workflow. No further action required. No further action required. It landed like a slap because it was so casual. So final. Like I'd asked whether a time card was missing an hour. That night, I stopped being the person who waited for fairness to arrive. Not because I wanted revenge, not yet. Because I understood the real problem. This wasn't one unfair decision. It was a system that could bend whenever the right last name leaned on it. And that was just the beginning. The next morning, FP&A asked for an updated forecast. We were heading into a re-forecast cycle. The kind where leaders pretend they're being disciplined while quietly shifting money between buckets. Our FP&A manager, Dan, sent a short message. Need payroll drivers updated by end of day. CFO review tomorrow morning. CFO review meant one thing. There would be questions, and those questions would not care about your feelings. I updated the model like I always did. Headcount, base pay, anticipated hires, attrition assumptions. Then I noticed something odd in the guidance notes. A new instruction pinned to the top of the file. Raise freeze remains in place for impacted teams. No off-cycle adjustments. Impacted teams. That was vague enough to mean whoever we say. I scrolled. The freeze note touched the same departments my payroll forecast covered. Then I saw the offset. A separate line in the model. Executive program allocations. Not new, but larger. And the timing matched the effective date on the CEO's daughter's adjustment. I didn't jump to conclusions. I did what finance people do when they're trying not to lie to themselves. I traced it. In the forecast workbook, there was a tab most people ignored. an appendix listing comp changes pulled from the HR feed. It included employee name, department, effective date, and annualized impact. My stomach tightened as I searched. There it was. Her name, her adjustment. Annualized impact, cleanly calculated. And right below, like an insult written in spreadsheet form, was a short list labeled Deferred Requests. I scanned it once. Then again. My name was on it. Next to it, in a column titled Disposition, there was a single word, Hold. No explanation. No development plan. No next cycle. Just a hold. Like my compensation was a lever they could pause whenever it was convenient. I sat back, staring at the screen, and the anger finally found a shape. Because now I wasn't dealing with a denial in a glass meeting room. I was looking at a documented decision in a finance-controlled file, prepared for leadership review, with my name on it like a quiet warning. And if this workbook existed, it meant something else existed too. The list had to come from somewhere, a source file, a workflow report, a trail. I didn't know it yet, but the next click I made would show me exactly who typed that word, and why they thought I'd never see it. I didn't take a screenshot. That's what a lot of people think you do in moments like that. Hit print screen, save it, start building a case like you're in a courtroom drama. But in real companies, screenshots make you look emotional. They make you look like you're collecting souvenirs. They also make you look guilty, even when you're right. I needed something cleaner. I needed provenance. So I did what I always did when numbers didn't make sense. I traced the source. The forecast workbook wasn't a random file. It pulled from a data feed, an export from HRIS that got staged into our reporting environment every week. It fed dashboards, compensation planning tabs, payroll variance packs. It was boring infrastructure. Boring infrastructure is where truth lives. I opened the tab that showed the data refresh log, timestamp, file name, owner, data source. There was an entry for the comp changes appendix. It referenced an internal report ID and a shared folder path. I copied the report ID and pulled it up in our reporting tool. The report was exactly what I expected, a standard compensation exception workflow summary. Requests submitted, approved, denied, held, with columns for requester, approver, HR business partner, and a small field called Notes. The kind of report leadership thinks nobody ever reads closely because it's operational. I filtered by my employee ID. There it was, my request, submitted by Priya, tagged as market adjustment, status set to hold. Then I filtered by the CEO's daughter. Her request was tagged as critical hire retention, even though she wasn't a hire. She was internal. And the status was approved, with a payband override flag set to yes. My throat tightened, not because I was shocked, but because the contrast was so deliberate. Then I clicked the notes field on my request. One sentence. Not aligned at this time due to compensation consistency during freeze. Revisit next cycle. That was Elaine's language. I could almost hear her voice reading it off a card, but it wasn't the sentence that got me. It was the metadata. The notes had been entered at a specific time, late in the evening, long after my meeting with Elaine, and the user who entered them wasn't Elaine. It was Dan, our FP&A manager. I stared at his name in the modified by field, like the screen was playing a joke on me. Dan wasn't HR. Dan didn't own my raise decision. Dan's job was forecasts and budget narratives. He shouldn't have been touching HR notes, fields at all. Unless finance had been invited into the workflow, unless someone wanted finance to help shape the story. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling tiles, trying to slow my pulse. My first instinct was to march into Dan's office and ask him why he was editing HR notes on my compensation request. But that would be the fastest way to become disruptive. It would turn a documented trail into a personal conflict. Dan would deny intent. Elaine would hide behind process. Priya would be forced to manage my behavior. So I didn't confront, I observed. The next morning, we had our weekly leadership forecast review prep. A smaller meeting before the CFO got the deck. Dan led it. Priya attended. A couple of directors dialed in. Dan shared his screen, running through headcount drivers with the casual confidence of someone who controlled the narrative. Raise freeze remains, he said, clicking to a slide with a neat chart. We need to protect margin. We can't have exceptions turning into precedent. Exceptions turning into precedent. He said it like a warning, and I watched Priya's expression harden for half a second before she smoothed it out. Then Dan moved on. He didn't look at me once. After the meeting, I waited until people dispersed and walked to his office. His door was open. He was typing, earbuds in. I knocked lightly. He pulled one earbud out. What's up? I kept my tone neutral. Quick question on the comp workflow report. Are you supposed to be editing notes on requests? His face didn't change much, but his eyes narrowed in the way people do when they're deciding whether you're a threat. He smiled. Small. We're aligning narratives, he said. Like that explained everything. Narratives, I repeated. Dan shrugged. Leadership doesn't want surprises. If HR is holding the line on comp bands, finance needs to support it. Otherwise, it becomes a budget fight. My jaw tightened. So you're adding notes to my file. Dan leaned back in his chair, relaxed. It's not personal, it's governance. Governance, another clean word. And the CEO's daughter? I asked, keeping my voice even. Is that governance too? Dan's smile flickered. Careful, he said softly, like he was offering advice. Don't make this about family. You'll lose that battle every time. There it was. Not denial. Not even discomfort. Just a warning. I nodded once. Understood. I turned to leave, and as I did, Dan added, almost casually, also, just so you know, access to those reports is being tightened. Too many people poking around. My stomach dropped. He said it like he was talking about security hygiene, but we both knew what it meant. He'd clocked my curiosity. He'd decided it was a problem. I went back to my desk and forced myself to breathe slowly. The office noise felt louder than usual, like I could hear keyboards and printers as individual sounds. I didn't have much time, so I made a decision I'd never made before at Halden Systems. I treated my own job like an audit, not an emotional crusade, not a revenge fantasy, a controlled procedural audit. I went through my recent deliverables, forecast files, variance packs, budget decks, and pulled the exact versions that had gone to leadership. Not because I wanted to leak them, but because version history matters. It shows who changed what, when, and why. Our files lived in a system with built-in versioning. Every edit left a fingerprint. If someone edited narratives, it would be visible. I opened the comp workflow report again and exported a copy. An authorized export, used all the time for review. Date stamp. Standard format. Nothing sneaky. Then I exported a second report. All comp exceptions over the last quarter, with the banned override flag. I wasn't targeting anyone. I wasn't naming the CEO's daughter. I was looking for a pattern. And I found one. Banned overrides weren't rare, just selectively applied. Most overrides clustered around a small set of names tied to one department. Executive programs. A department that wasn't operational, wasn't revenue, and somehow always had critical people. I highlighted the entries and compared effective dates to budget cycle moments. The timing wasn't random. Overrides happened right after leadership meetings where cost-cutting was announced. It was like the company squeezed everyone publicly, then quietly fed a select group through exceptions. That wasn't just unfair. That was reputationally dangerous. Because if a raise freeze is real, it has to be consistent, or it becomes evidence of favoritism, evidence of governance failure, evidence auditors and boards hate. I knew the CFO, Mark Ellison, cared about one thing above all, controllable risk. He wasn't a villain. He was the kind of CFO who didn't raise his voice. He just tightened the screws until people complied. He'd shut down whole initiatives with a sentence. But he hated surprises, and Dan was building narratives in HR systems. That was a surprise. I didn't know who I could talk to without getting labeled. So I chose the one safe corporate path that exists for people like me. I asked a process question, not to HR, not to my manager, to internal audit. Internal audit wasn't some shadowy group. It was 3 people who mostly did controls testing and compliance checklists. They were quiet, professional, and unfriendly to drama, which made them perfect. I didn't email something wild. I wrote one clean message. Hi, quick question. In the compensation exception workflow, are finance users permitted to modify notes fields or disposition narratives? I'm reviewing controls for forecast inputs and want to ensure separation of duties is maintained. Separation of duties. The phrase that turns politics into policy. I hit send, then stared at my inbox like I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. And then, less than an hour later, my access to the comp workflow report stopped working. I refreshed, logged out, logged back in, permission denied. I sat there motionless and felt something crack into place. Because Dan hadn't just warned me, he'd acted. They thought cutting my access would end my questions. But it did the opposite. It confirmed that the report contained something they didn't want me to keep seeing. And now I had to move carefully. Because the next thing they would try wouldn't be a permission change. It would be a label. Or a removal. And I wasn't going to let them do it quietly. The moment my access broke, the office felt quieter than it should have. I tried once more. Same error. Permission denied, no explanation, no ticket, no warning, and then silence, the kind that means something's gone wrong. At 9:17, a calendar invite hit my inbox. Quick sync, HR and FP&A. Elaine, Dan, 10 minutes. That title was always the same. Quick. Sync. Words designed to make you show up unarmed. I didn't forward it to Priya. I didn't ask anyone what it meant. I printed the agenda-less invite, closed my laptop, and walked. Elaine was already there with her corporate smile. Dan sat beside her like he belonged in HR meetings now. Elaine gestured to the chair. Thanks for coming on short notice. I sat down and kept my hands on the table. Dan didn't waste time. We noticed unusual activity on compensation workflow reporting. That was the first lie, cleanly phrased. It wasn't unusual activity. It was me doing my job and asking a controls question. Elaine tilted her head. To be clear, those reports contain sensitive employee compensation data. I know, I said. That's why access is role-based. My role includes payroll variance and forecast inputs. Dan leaned forward. Not that report. I looked at him. Then why did my role have access yesterday? Elaine's smile tightened. Access controls evolve. We're tightening them. After I asked audit about separation of duties, I said calmly. Dan's eyes flickered. Just once. Enough. Elaine held up a hand like she was smoothing a surface. Let's keep this professional. We're here because we want to make sure you understand expectations around data access and confidentiality. I do, I said. If there's a policy change, send it in writing. If you're alleging a breach, tell me exactly what I accessed that I wasn't authorized to access at the time. Dan's jaw clenched. You're being combative. I'm being precise, I replied. That's what you hired me for. Elaine's voice softened, but it wasn't kindness. It was control. We're going to put you on a temporary reassignment away from payroll-related reporting while we review. Reassignment. The corporate version of moving you off the field before the referee shows up. I nodded once. Who requested that? Elaine glanced at Dan, then back to me. It's a joint decision. Send it in writing, I repeated, and include the scope of the review, the policy basis, and whether this is disciplinary. Elaine's smile vanished. This is a conversation, not a negotiation. I stood up slowly. Then document it. Otherwise, it's just pressure. Dan's chair scraped as he shifted. You're making a big mistake. I looked at him. No, I'm refusing to make yours disappear. I walked out before my pulse could betray me. Back at my desk, there was already an email from Elaine. Effective immediately, you're not to access compensation workflow reporting. Please acknowledge. No mention of a breach. No mention of wrongdoing. Just a restriction and a demand for compliance. I acknowledged because acknowledging a restriction is not admitting guilt. Then I opened my sent folder and reread the message I'd sent to internal audit. It was still clean, still procedural. And then my phone rang. Unknown internal number. Is this? The voice paused. The analyst who emailed about separation of duties and comp exceptions? Yes, I said. This is Jonah from internal audit. His tone was flat, professional. I have 3 questions. Short answers. My spine straightened. Were you performing your normal duties when you accessed the workflow report? He asked. Yes. Did you export any information? Yes. Standard export format for forecast input validation. Did anyone instruct you to stop accessing it before access was removed? No. There was a brief pause, not dramatic. Just the sound of someone writing. Then Jonah said something that hit like a small, controlled explosion. Thank you. That's helpful. We're opening a controls review. We'll need the export you referenced and the refresh log that points to the report source. For the first time in days, someone else was treating this like what it was. A control failure, not a personality issue. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. I just felt my breathing normalize. I can send those, I said. Send to our intake mailbox, Jonah replied. Do not email executives. Do not forward to HR. Keep it contained. Understood. And one more thing, he added. If anyone retaliates, changes your role, threatens discipline, isolates you, document dates and communications. Use the ethics channel if needed. Retaliation. He said the word like it belonged in the room. After I hung up, I didn't draft a manifesto. I attached the authorized exports and the refresh log reference, and I sent them to audit intake exactly as instructed. No opinions, no accusations, just artifacts. That was my micro-catharsis. I wasn't alone in the logic anymore. The chaos started the same afternoon. Priya called me into a small conference room. Her eyes were tired in a way I hadn't seen before. They're asking me to sign off on a performance plan, she said quietly. For you. My stomach tightened, but my voice didn't change. On what basis? Judgment. Data sensitivity. Collaboration. She said the words like they tasted bad. I nodded. So they can reframe this as behavior. Priya swallowed. I told them no. But Dan is pushing. Elaine is backing him. I didn't ask Priya to fight harder. Managers who fight too hard become targets too. Instead, I said, if they send anything, forward it to me. I'll respond in writing. Priya hesitated. Audit is involved, isn't it? I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I just said, I'm handling it the right way. That night, my badge still worked. My email still worked. But my workflow access was gone, my projects were reassigned, and a quiet narrative was being built around me. The next morning, another invite landed. Finance Leadership Touchpoint, mandatory. CFO Mark Ellison, Dan, Elaine, legal counsel copied, no agenda. When I walked into that room, the air was different, heavier, colder. The CFO didn't stand. He didn't smile. He just gestured to a chair like this was a deposition without the court reporter. Mark folded his hands. We have a controls concern raised to internal audit, he said, looking directly at me. Separations of duty and compensation exception workflow. Dan's face was rigid. Elaine looked like she'd swallowed a coin. Mark continued, until audit concludes, we are freezing all compensation band overrides and exception approvals, effective immediately. Dan opened his mouth, then closed it. Mark turned slightly toward Elaine. Provide audit the full workflow permissions matrix, today. Elaine nodded once, tight. Then Mark looked back at me. You'll meet with audit this afternoon. You'll answer questions. You'll provide what you have, and you will not discuss this with anyone outside that process. I understand, I said. Mark's eyes didn't soften, but something else happened. The room stopped treating me like a problem and started treating the issue like a risk. That was the real shift. Dan tried one last move. "Mark, we should be careful about—" Mark cut him off with a single glance. "We will be careful by following controls." Silence. Then Mark said, "One more item." He slid a sheet across the table, not to me, but toward Elaine. The top line had a name I recognized instantly. The CEO's daughter. Mark's voice stayed level. "Legal wants documented justification for this override. Today. Before payroll cutoff." Elaine's fingers tightened around her pen. Dan stared at the table like it might open. I kept my face still, but inside, I felt the moment click into place. They could deny my raise in a glass room and call it bans, but they could not explain favoritism to legal under a controls review. As the meeting ended, my phone buzzed with a new calendar invite from internal audit. Interview, confidential. 5 minutes later, a second invite arrived, this one from Elaine. Performance discussion required acknowledgement. 2 meetings, 2 narratives, 2 outcomes. And in that exact moment, I understood what the next 48 hours would be. They were going to try to bury me before audit could finish digging, but they were already too late. I showed up to the audit interview with exactly what Jonah asked for and nothing he didn't. No opinions, no accusations, just the authorized export, the refresh log reference, and the report metadata showing who edited what and when. Jonah didn't meet me alone. There was another person in the room. Legal, introduced as here to observe. That told me this had already crossed the line from office politics into institutional risk. They asked me the same way accountants ask questions when they already know the answer. What reports did I access? Which days? For what purpose? Did anyone instruct me to stop before access was removed? Did anyone confront me about activity before sending restrictions? I kept it simple, procedural, and true. Every time they asked why, I anchored back to my job. Payroll variance explanation, forecast drivers, source validation. Then Jonah put one printed page on the table and slid it toward me. It was my comp request record, and underneath the notes field was the audit log, timestamp, user, change type. Dan's name was there. Again, Jonah asked, "Is Dan in HR?" "No," I said. "Did you ever authorize Dan to modify HR notes fields about your request?" "No." Legal didn't react, but her pen stopped for a second. That was the first real crack I'd seen in the calm. Jonah nodded and asked one last question that felt like the entire story, compressed into a single point. "Did you report this because you wanted a raise or because you believe the control was broken?" I could have said the honest, emotional answer, both. Instead, I said the answer that matters in corporations, because the control was broken. After that, they didn't need more from me. Jonah thanked me, reminded me not to discuss it, and walked me out like I was a witness, not a problem employee. By lunch, the company had changed tone, not publicly, quietly. My calendar cleared. The performance discussion invite from Elaine disappeared without explanation. A new email landed from her instead. Short, clipped, and suddenly careful. "Please disregard earlier scheduling. We will await audit guidance." That was my first real sign that someone had grabbed her leash. Later that afternoon, Priya called me again. "They've stopped pushing the performance plan," she said. Her voice sounded like relief and exhaustion braided together. "Dan is not himself." I didn't ask what that meant. I already knew. When a narrative collapses, the person who built it panics. At the end of the day, I got an email from the CFO's office. Not from Mark directly, but from his chief of staff. "You are temporarily reassigned to finance control support. Continue normal duties, excluding compensation workflow reporting. Any concerns about retaliation should be reported to ethics and internal audit." It wasn't warm. It wasn't an apology. But it was protection in corporate language. The next morning, everything snapped into focus. Payroll cutoff was approaching, and with the override freeze in place, exceptions couldn't be processed without documented justification and proper approvals. Legal needed clean records. Audit needed separation of duties restored, and the CEO's daughter's adjustment sat right at the center like a lit match. Around mid-morning, Dan's badge stopped working. I didn't see it happen, but in offices, information moves faster than elevators. Someone from IT walked with him to a conference room. Someone from legal joined. Then two more people, one from HR, one from security. No shouting, no dramatic escort. Just the quiet, humiliating choreography of consequences. By noon, his email auto-replied, "Dan is no longer with the company. Please direct urgent FP&A requests to interim coverage." The story would later become restructuring. But I'd seen the workflow log. I knew what it was. That afternoon, Internal Audit published a preliminary finding to the audit committee of the board. I didn't see the report, but Jonas summarized the outcome to me in a controlled, professional call. Separation of duties was violated, he said. Finance had right access to HR workflow narratives. That access was used to modify request notes, including yours. The control design was improper. He paused, then added, "Legal is handling the compensation-specific remediation. Audit is handling the control remediation. Your involvement ends here unless we need clarification." I thanked him and hung up, and for the first time in weeks, my shoulders dropped. Not because I'd won something, because the truth was now larger than me. It had a process, a committee, a paper trail. 2 days later, Priya forwarded me an email from HR. It was from Elaine. The tone was completely different, still corporate, but stripped of arrogance. "We are conducting a compensation process review. Your previously submitted adjustment request will be reevaluated. We will follow up with an outcome by end of week. No talk of misalignment. No talk of exceptions. Just a review." That same evening, a company-wide message went out from the CFO. It wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. He announced that compensation exception workflows were being suspended, pending controls, remediation. That system access would be reconfigured to restore proper separation, and that internal audit had initiated a review of recent overrides. He didn't name names, but everyone understood what happens when a CFO writes to the entire company with the words controls and exceptions in the same paragraph. By Friday, I got the outcome. Elaine scheduled a meeting, but this time she didn't bring Dan. She didn't bring a smile either. She brought a document. "We've approved a market adjustment," she said and pushed the paper across the table. The raise was exactly what Priya had asked for the first time. Not inflated, not heroic, just fair. Effective immediately, with back pay to the date of the original request. Elaine kept her eyes on the page like she didn't want to look at me too long. "This is part of a broader remediation." I nodded, understood. Then she added carefully, "Your role is also being rescoped into finance control support. The CFO's office requested it." That was the second piece of satisfaction, quiet, structural. They couldn't label me disruptive anymore, because the CFO had effectively rebranded me as a controls resource. Before the meeting ended, Elaine said one more thing, almost like she had to. "The compensation adjustment you referenced is being corrected." I didn't ask, "Did you get paid?" I didn't ask, "Did you claw it back?" In real life, those details become legal landmines, and I didn't need them. I already had the only proof that mattered. It couldn't stand. Later that day, I passed the CEO's daughter in the hallway. No entourage. No directors orbiting. Just her, walking fast, eyes forward like she was late to a meeting she no longer controlled. A month later, she was gone. The official note said she was pursuing opportunities outside the company. The CEO never addressed it directly. He didn't need to. Everyone could do the math. People asked me if I felt victorious. I didn't. I felt calm. Because I didn't win by yelling in a glass room or trying to humiliate anyone publicly. I didn't leak. I didn't threaten. I didn't play hero. I did what they taught me to do when I first joined finance. I followed the numbers. I documented the trail. I asked the right question in the right language. And the system that denied me with polished phrases, the same system that bent for a last name, had to correct itself in writing. That's the part nobody warns you about. Sometimes karma doesn't look like a dramatic downfall. Sometimes it looks like an audit log.